101.3 The Bone. Ed Talk with Big Dog D.
Keep it locked on the bone.
Coming at you live on the bone.
Welcome back to 103.1 The Bone. Coming at you live on Ed Talk with Big Dog D. Today we're talking about being demanding in the classroom. We have 4 different interviews from 4 different experts in their fields. We got 4 different topics coming your way today, using standards to guide every learning opportunity, to ensure students set personal learning objectives for every lesson, to peel back the curtain on performance and expectations, and measuring those standards against high expectations. Our first topic is coming straight out of the news. Recently, a former middle school teacher was booed and heckled when she took the podium in defense of the Common Core standards in a Florida school board meeting. We have brought to the studio liberal commentator from Massachusetts, Mr. Waldo Whitman, and Tea Partier straight shooting state of Texas, Mr. Dick Preston, to debate the issue. Uh-oh.
Pressure rising in the bone zone.
So, Waldo, or may I call you Mr. Whitman, why would standards help our dear children improve their grades?
Well, Mr. Dog, for starters, standards can be internationally benchmarked. This means that we could monitor our progress by comparing ourselves to other countries.
All right, interesting idea from Mr. Whitman. Mr. Dick Preston, how do you respond to that?
I'm an American and a patriot, sir. I refuse to believe the existence of other countries.
The standards will increase rigor in the classroom and thus better prepare our students for college and global work success.
It's just a hoax to get the federal government involved in the education of my children. I'm sure them teachers don't even use standards.
I use standards to guide every learning opportunity. The students do better on tests when they have been taught what's been tested. Our schools in Massachusetts improved performance tremendously when we got our curriculum in order. Personally, standards help me clearly defining what students should be learning, and it helps my colleagues and I to know what our students should be taught at every grade level. Then the administration can ensure that those standards get taught in every single classroom.
The state of Massachusetts has liberally biased students. I'm certain of it. I home teach my children. I read them some of them standards from the state of Texas, and they were not clear to me at all.
Why creative teachers are so important. We must open up the meaning of the standards to make clear to our students what skills must be learned.
Mr. Whitman, what does that even mean?
We must determine what declarative knowledge, such as concepts, vocabulary, facts, and details, and procedural knowledge, such as skills, procedures, abilities, the students must acquire to master their standards.
I ought to tell you, Mr. Whitman, that just sounds like micromanaging and putting a straitjacket to our children's education.
That's a good one. What do you have to answer that, Mr. Professor Whitman?
I beg to differ. Standards give us an opportunity to frame our lessons around broad, essential questions to help students find personal relevance. Also, it allows us to devote time and energy not to figure out what material to teach, but to determine how to teach it. That material can be personalized and that way engage the student.
All right, live debate coming at you on 101.3 The Bone. I want to say thank you to Mr. Preston.
Okay.
And Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, it was such a pleasure.
For an outstanding debate. You're in the Bone Zone.
Keep it locked on the bone.
All right, a good little back and forth there on Ed Talk. Coming at you next, we have something very, very special. We're interviewing an actual student, Little Johnny, about his experiences in high school and his feelings about grades.
Coming at you live on the bone.
So, Little Johnny, what's your take on getting good grades at school?
Well, this year we've got a new teacher, so It's a little bit different. Last year, if we tried hard, we used to get good grades. This year, our teacher gives us our grades based on what we know and what we can do.
Well, very interesting. How does your teacher assign these grades to you?
He grades our assignment work and our tests, and he rewards us with class parties for being good. Sometimes he helps us by giving us an effort rubric, so we can see how putting in lots of effort can improve our grades.
Well, what a good idea. Do you think that's a fair way of doing it?
Oh, I think it's fair, because sometimes last year, even the dumb kids used to get good grades because our last teacher used to bump them up if he liked them or if they tried really hard. Now we get good grades because we deserve them.
Well, that sounds fantastic, but, I mean, what does this teacher do to manage your class's behavior?
He's got a square jar. I mean a swear jar for bad language. And sometimes he lets us work on fun extension tasks if we get all our work done. Our last teacher used to take points off our grade for being bad. One time he took points off me and it wasn't even my fault. That sucked.
Well, what does this new teacher do to reward all your hard work and your good efforts?
Well, we used to get extra points, but Mr. Bourke, he's way better. He lets us tally up lucky stars on the star chart. And if we get 10, we get a candy.
Well, I've heard bad things about that Mr. Bourke, but what kind of work does he give you for homework?
Well, for homework, we practice what we learn in class each day, and our teacher helps us by checking through the answers in group discussion the next day. We can get stars in our star chart for doing all of our homework too.
And what do you do in class?
Well, Mr. Bossing, our last teacher, used to give us multi-choice quizzes, and we figured out if you just chose in order A, B, C, D, you'd always get an A. Mr. Bourke does it way better. He gives us open-ended assignments that make us use our critical thinking skills. Some of the not-so-smart kids can't do the hardest questions.
Little Johnny, thank you for coming into 101.3 The Bone. That was an outstanding interview. You're going to be something great, my friend.
Oh, thank you.
All right, 101.3. KBONE. All right, welcome back to 101.3 The Bone. You know, sometimes here on Ed Talk we get a little fired up, start having a little bit too much fun. But if I can talk to you folks about something very close to my heart for just a few minutes of your time, well, it would make old Big Dog D feel real good inside. What is this topic that I have on my mind, you ask? Well, I'm glad you considered the question. The topic is rubrics. Specifically, what is the value of these rubrics in education? Well, I'm glad you asked. You know, friends, using a quality rubric creates transparency for all involved. I'm talking students, parents, even the teacher themselves. You know, a good rubric can do it all. It can improve your students' metacognition, their motivation, and even make them more receptive to feedback coming up. Boy, couldn't we all use some of that? Next question that a lot of people have is, what do the rubrics do to change student perspectives? Well, I say, number one, and most importantly, it increases their self-efficacy. That's right, folks. Students feel like they've earned their marks rather than just been given their marks. And how much is that worth in today's wacky world? Students can focus on skills and not just grades, and they can zero in and really fine-tune incredibly specific skills. Now, I know when you think about rubrics, you probably think about the same thing that I do, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. That's because every student has their Goldilocks zone, a place where they feel challenged, but not too challenged. And that is where most students achieve their best work. By using a rubric, students can easily identify their Goldilocks zone and work to have the most success. So, before Big Dog D turns it over to Miss Sandy V in her final interview here on Ed Talk 101.3 The Bone, I want to give you a few tips and tricks about making your own rubric. Number one, start in the middle of the rubric and branch out. Number two, leave the numbers off formative rubrics to take the pressure off the kids. And number three, have a model or an example in addition to the rubric. Alright, folks. That's all I got for you on Ed Talk today. Keep it locked on 101.3. The Bone. Alright, ladies and germs, welcome back to Ed Talk with your host, Big Dog D. Ow! You know, it's the final segment here on Ed Talk, and we got something extra special for you guys. We have an interview with the recipient of the Best American Teacher Award. She's coming at you live out of the glamorous state of Florida. Let's have a big round of applause for Miss Sandy V. Alright, so Miss Sandra, how did your students achieve the best grades of all time on a national level?
Hello, Big Dog D. There is no mystery for my students about what I want them to learn. I always start with the end in mind. Every class I teach is guided by a learning objective, and I am clear about what I want them to learn. I identify what I want my students to learn, as well as how they will demonstrate that learning.
So how do these little angels actually learn?
To answer this question, I would like to use a metaphor. The best way to eat an elephant is a bite at a time. With my students, I break down challenges to manageable components. I provide students with concrete and challenging yet short-term goals. One way to do this is by having students create a graphic organizer that shows which steps they must accomplish successfully in order to achieve the overarching goal. This helps them understand that conquering the smaller objectives will eventually lead them to the broader learning goal.
And in your expert opinion, does every single student need to have the same objectives?
No. Simply calling out learning objectives won't make students learn. Students need to adopt these goals as their own. I help students personalize their own learning goals through several methods. For example, I'm a big fan of the pretest. The pretest helps each student identify any knowledge gaps they may have. Once these gaps are determined, they can choose which direction they need to move in order to improve the skill being taught. These questions will help the students determine what they still need and want to learn. It is also important to have a predictable place where they can reference these learning objectives.
All right, Miss Sandy V, do you have any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
I do, Big Dog. Learning requires effort from the student's part. Ultimately, it is the student's desire to learn or master a skill that counts the most.
All right. Thank you so much. You heard it here first, folks, from the recipient of America's Best Teacher Award, Miss Sandy V. Ed Talk with Big Dog D.
Keep it locked on the bone.